Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm grateful to all of you who joined us today. My name is Chamonix Toledo, and today I'm going to share the details of my capstone project, Reimagining Research Collaborations in Oceania. Before starting the Coastal Science and Policy program, I spent over 4 years working with communities in the Federated States of Micronesia on projects that touched on everything from environmental health to culture and community well-being. I was lucky to work with incredible mentors who showed me what it looks like to do research with communities, not just about them or for them. But over time, I saw that this kind of collaboration was the exception, not the rule. And it inspired me to dive deeper into how research could be more collaborative, more inclusive, and led by the communities it aims to serve. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a Western researcher, trained in and shaped by institutions that have historically benefited from extracting from communities. From the start of my career, I've understood that the world I come from has often caused harm and marginalized others. With that awareness, I actively work, both professionally and personally, to unlearn colonial practices and contribute to a more just and equitable future, especially through work like this Capstone project. Most of the work I'll be talking about today takes place in Oceania, which is a region that spans the central and southern Pacific and includes over 10,000 islands across more than 14 countries. These island communities are deeply tied to the ocean with generations of knowledge rooted in caring for marine ecosystems. The yellow arrow on this map points to the island of Palau, where some of my capstone work took place. So research across Oceania faces a number of challenges, but I want to focus on 3 that I believe are especially important and actionable. First, there's a knowledge gap among many outside researchers and environmental practitioners. While many have a strong scientific training, most haven't been taught how to work with communities and how to co-design research that reflects local values, priorities, and knowledge systems. Second, communities are often left out of research that directly affects their livelihoods and well-being, and in most cases, they're not meaningfully involved in the research process. And third, because research often influences management and policy, when it's not grounded in local context or co-created with communities, the outcomes can fall short. Conservation efforts may be short-lived, ineffective, or simply not supported by the local community. So my capstone project tackles these 3 challenges through 3 opportunities. One is identifying and elevating excellent case studies of collaborative research. Another is training the next generation to learn how to work collaboratively so they're ready to create real impact through research. And finally, analyzing current research approaches to find the gaps and identify opportunities to improve research co-design. So for the first part of my capstone project, I conducted a systematic literature review to better understand how research collaborations are currently taking place across Oceania and to identify gaps where collaboration is falling short. The goal of this is to help us as researchers reflect on and improve our practices so that our work better supports both communities and the environments we aim to protect. So in conservation research, you'll often see terms like collaborative, community-based, or participatory used to describe how projects are done. And on the surface, these terms suggest progress and that researchers are working with communities in meaningful ways. But when you look more closely, it's often unclear what those terms actually mean. Most published literature and presentations don't explain how collaboration happened or go into detail on the nature of the partnership. And the problem here is that there's a gap between the words we use and the reality of how research is conducted. And when collaboration isn't clearly defined, it can lead to tokenism, where communities are mentioned but not truly involved in the process. So over the past year, alongside my fieldwork, I conducted a systematic literature review to analyze and develop data for some of the challenges I just described. And over the course of the year, I screened 533 abstracts, which led to 132 full text reviews and ultimately 72 papers that were included in the final quantitative synthesis. And these papers covered a wide range of topics from marine spatial planning and the development of marine protected areas to fisheries research, coral reef and seagrass monitoring, and more. And to evaluate each study, I used an existing scale developed for a global literature review to assess how community engagement was reflected across the research process. This scale you see at the bottom ranks studies from contractual to indigenous, depending on the level of community authority over the research process. So for each paper, I looked at who designed the research questions, who came up with the methods, who implemented the research, who analyzed the data, and a couple other indicators for responsible community engagement. And this gave me a way to move beyond surface level descriptions and look more closely at the actual structure of engagement in each study. So at this time, I'm still in the process of analyzing data and synthesizing my findings, and I wanted to show you some of the preliminary findings which are really illuminating and can tell us about the nature of research engagements across Oceania. So in my review, I looked at 6 indicators of meaningful collaboration. Access, whether findings were shared with Indigenous communities through things like presenting research back to communities or making the data accessible. Relevance, this is whether the research addressed priorities defined by the community. Credit, how knowledge holders were acknowledged, ranging from no mention to co-authorship. Ethics, so whether ethical practices were reported, like free, prior, and informed consent, or IRB protocols were mentioned. Cause no harm, so this is whether the study protected intellectual property rights or sensitive cultural information. And then outputs, so whether the research created tangible benefits like educational materials, training, or adaptation tools. And what you can see here is that all of the gray area in this figure is where there was no reporting of these responsible community engagement indicators. This means that the paper mentioned no detail of any of these indicators. In instances where an indicator was mentioned, the figure shows in color, so either green if it was mentioned, or different shades of blue or orange to indicate a little bit more about the reporting. And what we're seeing here is that many of these studies fail to report key indicators of responsible community engagement. And this likely means one of 2 things. Either researchers didn't use collaborative methods, or they did use them, but didn't report them in their publications. Either way, it highlights a major opportunity for improvement, because when we don't share how we engage with communities, it makes it harder for others to learn from our work. And as researchers, we build knowledge by learning from each other. We cite one another's methods, we look to published work as models, and we draw on case studies to guide our own practice. That only works if all the details are there. So when we take the time to report our engagement practices clearly, especially when working with communities, we're not just strengthening our own work, but we're helping to grow a research community that values collaboration, accountability, and equity. This next figure brings us back to that participation scale I introduced earlier, showing the range of how communities were involved in the research projects I reviewed. So on that x-axis, you can see different levels of participation, from contractual, which is where communities were not involved or only minimally engaged, to Indigenous-led, where communities had full leadership over the research process. And the red dotted line presents a key threshold, which is the point where participation shifts from being primarily led by outside researchers to being led by local communities. So anything below the red line was largely controlled by outside researchers, while anything above it reflects greater community authority and decision-making power. And the x-axis outlines 3 study stages: design, implementation, and analysis of the research. What we can see here is that the majority of the studies fall below the collaborative threshold, which is that red dotted line, which tells us that many of the papers I reviewed are currently failing to engage communities in a way where their perspectives, insights, and contributions are meaningfully a part of the research effort. So the second part of my capstone moved from analysis to practice. And while the literature review helped me understand how collaboration is represented in published research, this part of the project allowed me to directly contribute to community-led inquiry by co-teaching a course in Palau in partnership with local researchers. Palau is an island in Western Oceania known for its rich marine ecosystems, strong cultural traditions, and deep connection to the ocean. The photo on the left is an aerial view of Olay village, located in Narralong State, at the northernmost tip of Palau's main island. On the right, you can see a map with a yellow arrow pointing to Olay village. Olay is a beautiful traditional fishing village with an actively operating port, vibrant mangrove forest, and healthy seagrass beds. And the white building in the bottom right corner of the photo is where I lived during my time there for nearly 5 months of learning, teaching, and building relationships. While working in Palau, I partnered with the Abil Society, a locally founded and led nonprofit that spent over 20 years engaging youth and community members in environmental education and resource stewardship, all grounded in Indigenous knowledge. My practitioner mentors were Anne Singeo, Abil's founder and a longtime environmental leader in Palau, and Caroline Ferguson-Irlanda, a social science researcher at Stanford University. Anne and Caroline have worked together for nearly a decade to support more equitable, community-led ocean research in Palau. And together we co-designed and co-taught a course called Decolonizing Environmental Research. And this course brought together high school students from across Palau to design and lead their own community-based research projects with guidance and support from us as instructors. So this course was intentionally designed to model what real-world research collaboration can look like. As instructors, we recognize that we each brought different life experiences, research perspectives, and areas of expertise to the table. So the course was co-taught by a Western researcher, myself, and a Palauan researcher, Ann Singeo. This wasn't just a logistical decision, it was a values-based one. We wanted students to see what it looks like to co-create research that's meaningful to everyone involved. And this model worked really, really well because it allowed the research to be both locally grounded and globally relevant. My role as a Western researcher wasn't to lead, but to support and to offer access to resources, funding, and opportunities like publishing or presenting at conferences, which might not always be accessible to community partners. That way, communities can engage in the ways that matter most to them while still contributing to research that can be shared more broadly. So alongside Anne, we built a teaching partnership where each of us introduced a different research lens. And Anne brought years of research experience, deep cultural knowledge, and place-based context. She helped us ask relevant research questions, interpret and code data through a cultural lens, and introduce students to Palauan approaches to research. I complemented Anne's expertise by supporting students in research design, introducing scientific tools they were interested in, and helping ensure those tools were used in ways that respected and aligned with local priorities. So our students didn't just participate, they led the entire research process. They designed 25 interview questions, conducted 21 interviews, and fully transcribed, coded, and analyzed the data themselves. The questions were written in both Palauan and English and delivered in Palauan during interviews, which was incredibly important for practicing the language and supporting intergenerational knowledge sharing. And they explored everything from traditional and modern fishing methods to local knowledge of key ecosystems and the deep relationships fishers have with the ocean. And their commitment to this work was absolutely amazing. We drove hours across the island and even took boats to outer islands to conduct interviews, many of which lasted over an hour. And some weekends, students spent 6 or more hours just on this part of the research. So when we begin our training with Palauan students, we expose them to both Western and Palauan research approaches, including different methodologies and epistemologies. And one of the most crucial aspects of developing collaborative, context-specific marine solutions is that researchers must embody humility and patience. 3 Palauan lessons guide this approach. The first is to come with an empty basket, and this reminds us to arrive without rigid agendas. In conservation and beyond, researchers often show up with full baskets, packed with project goals, methods, and assumptions. But effective ethical science begins with listening. It means making space for local expertise, values, and priorities that shape the work from the start. The second is become words of the land. It's a call to ensure our work reaches and serves the people who need it most, not just academic audiences, but the communities directly impacted by the issues we study. Scientific findings need to be communicated in ways that are accessible and relevant to the people they impact through local language, community meetings, or creative tools like art and storytelling. Research shouldn't just empower local decision-making, but it should, research should empower local decision-making, not just circulate in journals. And the third is practice reciprocity. This means ensuring mutual benefit. If we as researchers gain publications, recognition, or career advancement, local communities must also gain something meaningful, whether it's training, resources, or shared authorship. And true reciprocity moves beyond extractive models and moves toward shared authority and lasting partnerships. These lessons were written by my practitioner partners a few years ago in the Journal for Conservation Biology, and you can scan the QR code to learn more about these lessons there. And so as part of this course, we emphasize the importance of sharing research findings, not just with the outside world, but with the communities that made the research possible in the first place. As a team, we decided to share our findings in a few different ways. And one of the first was a collaborative article in Sea Voice magazine, which is for ocean researchers, practitioners, and leaders. And this article included reflections from both the students and instructors and highlighted what it meant to take part in a research process rooted in community, culture, and mutual learning. Several students shared their experiences, and their reflections were really thoughtful. If you're interested, you can share, or you can scan the QR code to read the full article. In addition to that, the students also had the opportunity to present their findings last month at UC Santa Cruz and Stanford University. They delivered a seminar here on their research and participated in a conference focused on building equitable and collaborative research partnerships. And finally, the students are now in the process of writing a book to share what they learned about traditional fisheries and fishing methods in Palau. And on the right, you can see the working outline of the chapters we're drafting together. So as I move forward, I'm focused on continuing to share this work in ways that are both meaningful and accessible. I'll continue supporting the students as they write a book based on their research findings in their own words, which will be a resource for both Palauan communities, future youth researchers, and a broader audience interested in Palauan fisheries. And I'm also preparing a literature review for peer-reviewed publication with the goal of contributing to broader conversations about equity and collaboration in conservation research, and also offering tangible evidence of gaps that can be addressed through better practice. And finally, I'll be working to share this work more broadly through blog posts and public articles and community forums, so these insights are not only published, but reachable by the people they most affect. And I'll be presenting some of this work at public talks and conferences starting next week at the International Congress for Conservation Biology in Brisbane, Australia. I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible team of people who contributed to this project and who have mentored and supported me over the past 2 years, for some even longer, actually. And I'm deeply grateful for your guidance, encouragement, and belief in this work. Thank you to Pete Ramundi and Elena Finkbeiner for incredible mentorship as faculty advisors. To Anne Singeo, Caroline Ferguson-Irlanda, and our amazing students, thank you so much for such a meaningful learning experience. And to the Abeele Society, thank you for welcoming me and becoming my home for several beautiful months. I also want to thank several other mentors and friends who were integral to this journey. Sarah Cannon, the CSP team, Nicole Ardoin, Ryan O'Connor, Carrie Pomeroy, and Peter Nelson and Suzanne Alonso, who initially encouraged and supported me in applying for the CSP program. And finally, I'm grateful to the funders and fellowships that made this work possible, the Quad Fellowship, Inker QEA, the CSP program, and the UCSC Division of Social Sciences. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to taking your questions that you might have at this time.